All right. We are recording to the cloud. So again, my name is Pat Cameron. Welcome to Connecting Families. We are thrilled to have our speaker here tonight. And to introduce her, I am going to pass the baton on to my colleague, Aseriani.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Aseriani Leo. I'm with the School Finder program, a multilingual helpline here at the Federation. And we're designed to assist families in navigating educational options across our state. And we support families facing a range of challenges, including school enrollment, placement options, and the intersection of immigration and education. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Anna Soler. Anna is a passionate advocate and a leading expert in language access and family engagement. Before we dive into the presentation, I'd like to take a moment to highlight our partnership with Anna and Natizo. Through this collaboration, we are working to expand support for multilingual families, enhance interpreter training, and improve educational access. Today, Anna will be sharing valuable insights on effective communication with multilingual families in the education context. So let's get started. Anna, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you giving us the space this time to have very important conversations about culture and language and how they do intersect. So I do encourage you to ask questions. I know we have some people here attending live and you'll be watching the recording. I'm always available to answer any questions after the session. But feel free to write them down as they come. Sometimes we forget the questions that we were going to ask, so feel free to do that on the chat. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And, okay. Can everybody see my screen okay? We're good? Okay.
Yes.
So just a little bit about the organization that I have the honor of representing, the National Association of Educational Translators and Interpreters of Spoken Languages. We call it NATISL for short because it is a very long name. But we have been around for, or formally, I should say, since 2019, although the idea of NATISL was born way long before that. One of the things that we're very proud about is the fact that we engage with educators, with multilingual families, and of course with interpreters and translators to work through language access and language justice and making sure that interpreters, translators have the tools that they need to be able to be effective collaborators with everybody. So we're really thrilled of the work that we have been doing. I'll tell you some of the resources that we have on our website. We have created a variety of best practices and tools that are available to you, free to download. You don't have to be a member of the organization to access these resources. And we work with a lot of experts. We understand that we're not knowledgeable in all the areas, but we're very lucky to have a variety of advisory committees that work for to develop resources for families and also for folks who speak languages of low dispersion to make sure that everybody's represented. So our professional development opportunities focus on foundational skills of interpreters, but also the continuing education that must happen. And we are in the process of creating a national certification test for spoken language interpreters in education. Because right now we don't have one, and we want to make sure that our profession as interpreters in education is elevated to the essential work that we do. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a second. This is my standard slide for introducing myself. Pretty much this is my whole life here. But I am originally from Colombia. I came when I was 14 to the United States and automatically became my family's interpreter. So I have a little bit of experience being that child interpreter that misinterpreted everything that had to do with my education. So I really, I bring that experience in anything that we do in the TESOL or the courses that we teach. But my training started as a social worker working for a children's hospital here in the state of Georgia, where I am. And that's when I started seeing a lot of those disparities in terms of language access and health, definitely between all of the families that I was meeting. Later on, I started a company, CESO Inc., and we've been around for almost 11 years now, providing services, interpretation and translation services for schools throughout the United States. And then the dream of having a national organization for interpreters was born because of that need that we were seeing for additional training, not only for interpreters, but also the educators that collaborate with them, and of course the family. So I also teach a few courses for the University of Georgia, and I'm in the process of finishing my doctoral degree in special education. So this is a picture of me when I graduate, because it seems like it's just going to take forever. Hopefully, I'll have less gray hair, but it seems like it's almost there, but not quite there. But the reason I decided to do that is because we needed more research related to language access, to the quality of interpretation, and how that impacts family engagement. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So that's kind of the reason why it was I was so thrilled to be able to participate in this presentation, because it's I'm just now, a couple of days ago, finished a lot of research for my comprehensive exams for the doctorate. So my head is full of this information, which is great. So I want to share a little bit about some of the things that I found through my reading, through the research, and to see if any of that is helpful as you engage with families that have children with disabilities and who are multilingual, multicultural, and how to bring those pieces together. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Oops. There we go. Nope. Okay, my mouse is going crazy. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the research on culture and disability, and how to bring all those pieces together again. So I do want you to remember that all research has limitations, that we have to be pretty, aware that, not everything is reported as it should be. So we have to really make sure that we understand that, there are some things that we need to learn more about as we read research. So some of the statements that you're going to see, or some of the information that I'll provide, of course, they don't represent an entire population. Every person is a world, and people may have different experiences. But I just want to give you an overview of what I have found in terms of that intersection between culture and language, and also children with disabilities. So, of course, as you know, we have to be very respectful of everybody's journey in terms of the special education process, and also their acculturation level, their ability to adjust to a new life here in the United States. So the reason we want to know about this is because it really helps to expand your skills as educators, your skills as a parent, your skills as an interpreter and translator, if that's who you are, and figure out how to collaborate with each other. It's really important that we understand everybody's perspective in that sense. So a little bit about what the research is telling us. We have seen that a lot of parents, of course, and I'm sure you have seen this in your practice, they're still in that denial or process of accepting the child's functioning and their understanding of a disability. And this is presented across cultures. There's not specifically for one particular culture. This is, and one thing to remember is that we all have culture, whether you were born in the United States or another country. We all have particular characteristics that make up our culture. So when we talk about culture, it's really across the board. But we have found that Hispanic Latino mothers, for example, wanted to have more information about, how to come to terms with their child's disability, and what is their role in the therapy process? What is their role in the educational setting? So sometimes we'll talk a little bit about some of the perspectives that the parents bring, and how you as educators or interpreters or parents themselves can create those bridges. We also found through research that Korean American parents and Korean parents found a strong relationship between social and cultural contexts. and how they need to adapt to an exceptional child. So meaning that communities are very important. So it's not just about speaking to the parent, but sometimes spreading that information to the community itself and involving those important people in the child's life. We also know that in many cultures, that sense of collaboration really needs to happen. So a lot of parents really wanted to make sure that they found the tools, or that they were given suggestions about how to collaborate with educators, how can I help, basically, right? What can I do at home to be able to help my child? And this was, the same across many different cultures. Some families, specifically Arab American families, they wanted to really have a way to build, again, those relationships with educators, so that they could have an open communication, which leads to that collaboration and that engagement that we want to have with the parents. Trust came through in many of the readings that I was able to gather in a lot of the research. So parents really want to create those trusting relationships, so that that communication can happen, and again, that collaboration can happen. Sometimes there was not enough opportunities to create those events, or those meetings where you had that trust building relationship happening. And so parents were really seeking that those opportunities to be able to open those communication channels. With one particular culture, the Hmong parents really wanted to improve that collaboration with communities, so that they can increase their trust and be able to be more open about the strengths of their children, and also the areas of improvement. So they really wanted to make sure that they trusted the educators and the people that were communicating with them, so that they can really explain what was going on with their child at home, for example. So trust is definitely very much connected with culture and communication. And speaking of communication, we know we have all very different styles regardless of our culture. Some parents who may have been living here in the United States for a longer time may have a different type of communication style. But they really, a lot of the parents really wanted to see themselves as part of the team. They wanted to collaborate, they wanted to share. But of course, a lot of them were still influenced by traditional values that placed a lot of emphasis on the respect of authority. And if we think about some of the special education meetings that we have, we often encourage parents to ask questions, right? In many of the meetings, we have sections where the parents need to voice their concerns, and that may not be part of the culture, right? We may be asking something that is considered disrespectful to them, and so it's important to kind of keep that in mind as you create those bridges of communication. Same thing with opinions. Asking questions is not, it's a generalization. Again, we have to remember that this is not specific to every parent who speaks a language other than English. But it is, general information to keep in mind, if especially if you are an educator, to figure out how to create those communication bridges as you go. It is difficult for some families to interrupt professionals to seek clarity, so they may nod and they may say, "Yep, I understand everything you're saying," when in fact there's just a lot of questions going on. And that's when, that interpreter that works with you, that communication piece has to be really emphasized, and the quality of interpreter services needs to be emphasized, because we really want to make sure that that parent input is included in everything that we do. So in general, all parents, and this is across the board, has nothing to do with culture. We all want the same for our children. We want that educational equity, regardless of the ability levels of our children. But a lot of the reading that I did, I saw that there was this pattern. Obviously, we want to be respectful to each other. We want educators to be respectful to us as parents. We want to be seen for the assets that we bring in terms of our culture, of our language, and to be as compassionate in terms of our communication as possible. We want to, hear educators speak in our language, literally, meaning that, of course, the interpretation services have to be provided when needed. But it's beyond that. It's more about making sure that the educators speak to us in a jargon-free language. And I know in special education, I think especially, you have a lot of abbreviations, a lot of jargon, a lot of, really complex terms that even for English speaking parents, they're very difficult. So imagine trying to transfer that information from one language to the other when sometimes some of those terms don't exist. I was just doing a training just this morning, and we were talking about it in some languages. For example, the word for autism does not exist. The word for hyperactivity does not exist in their language. And so they have to almost create language as they go, as they interpret for you. So choosing the right person to provide that communication leads to trust, leads to that collaboration that we really want with families. So a few tips about collaborating effectively with interpreters, again, because that communication is so very important. Number one, make sure that the family actually needs an interpreter, and that seems to be, pretty self-explanatory, but sometimes we assume that the parent may need an interpreter when in fact they feel very comfortable speaking English with you if you are the educator. Some families, for example, may prefer to have an interpreter, in the background, just in case they need clarification with some terms. And it is important that we give them the autonomy, right? We help them feel as empowered as possible to be able to have the ability to communicate as much as they can, but have a professional interpreter in the background just to be that backup, right? Just to be that support. So another, sometimes that is very obvious, but sometimes we go through the motions of providing interpreter services or language access and really, not making sure that the family and the interpreter actually do speak the same language. And we've had, for example, cases where a Portuguese interpreter was asked to help for a Spanish speaking family. And, during the special education meeting, because their languages are very similar, quote unquote. So they're two very different languages. So we do have to make sure that we provide the right service for the right family. With some languages, you may have some variation. In Arabic, there are many different variations of Arabic. So there is a universal Arabic. So, it is important to make sure that you ask the family for their preference, but also make sure that that you provide the right interpreter for the right family. Meeting with the interpreter prior to the meeting is crucial, and giving them as much information as you possibly can is very, very important. We don't speak this language every day. We don't speak the education, jargon language every day. So it is important that you give us as much information as you can ahead of time. Even if it's, information about the child's disability, or whether this is the first meeting that the family is going to have, or this is the, a reevaluation and the family is already a little bit more familiar with what's going on. All of that information is very helpful to us as interpreters so that we can be as prepared as possible. So when you give us a lot of information ahead of time, we can be better interpreters for you and more accurate. Because again, we're able to do a little bit more preparation, but sharing documents if that's possible in your setting, ensuring that, as interpreters who are trained, we are trained to protect confidentiality. So we are aware that, information needs to be protected. So you can be sure that if somebody has been trained professionally as an interpreter, that they are going to be protecting that information as you would. This may be a little hard for some educators, for sure, but I know families appreciate the limit of the use of jargon and abbreviations. Sometimes it's just automatic. We get so used to throwing abbreviations that, sometimes as interpreters will take us a little bit longer to relay, because we often have to explain what the abbreviation is, or intervene and ask you to spell it out so that we can relay that information. But limiting that will speed up the meetings definitely a little bit more. And just reviewing this information ahead of time, providing us with any background information will be really helpful so that we can be as prepared even before we meet the family. Now, during the actual meeting, it's important to talk to everybody about the presence of the interpreter. We don't want to be, I remember one educator called an interpreter an interrupter. We don't want to interrupt the meeting. We want to be part of this meeting. We want to collaborate with you. We may, let you know that we are going to be needing pauses and clarification because, again, this is not a language that we use every single day. So even if you have interpreters who have a lot of experience with the language, it's still going to be something that they may need to ask about. And, having a physical place where the interpreter can have that eye contact with the family and also with you as the educator is really important. The reason for that is because we are trained to be very aware of body language and making sure that we, if we can tell that a family may have some questions or, they may be a little bit confused when we explain information about, percentiles and, standardized scores and things like that, we may be able to raise our hand and ask you to paraphrase or to give us another way to interpret the same information. So we have to be aware of that body language, and interpreters who have been trained are usually very aware of some of those places where you have to really intervene and ask for clarification. And then understand that interpreters cannot really loan documents on the spot. So for example, we've had interpreters who share that in a special education meeting, they are given the parent rights or the procedural safeguards to, verbally relay the information to the parent on the spot. So that, number one, it puts the interpreter in a really difficult spot. Number one, it's usually not recommended because the language is, has a lot of legal context, which we as interpreters and translators, we are taught to have a lot of resources and take a lot of time to investigate language. And so when you ask us to do that on the spot, it's likely not going to be very accurate. And of course, with something like the procedural safeguards, you need to be accurate, right? So one option that you have is to read the sections that you want us to interpret and have the interpreter relay the information that you are reading out loud so that we can, go back to being the interpreter that we need to be and helping you connect with the family. But usually things that are too long, meaning more than one page, is not something that an interpreter can actually read out loud on the spot, especially if it's something that has a lot of that legal language. So a couple of other things about collaborating effectively with interpreters. One thing that we teach interpreters to do all the time is to introduce themselves as they are part of the of the team, right? So we want to make sure that interpreters have the opportunity to just take 2 minutes. It takes less than 2 minutes to introduce themselves and let people know how the interpretation is going to be conducted. Meaning, letting people know that they need to give the interpreters pauses, that they need to speak clearly and definitely one at a time, because as you can imagine, if you're listening to the information, processing all that information in your language, finding the right words, and then turning it back to you in another language while somebody speaks at the same time, it's just very confusing and hard for the interpreter to process. So the interpretation is not going to be as accurate. So you have to give us, enough time to process and to allow for those pauses so that we can find the right words in our heads, right? It's amazing what the process of interpretation is, just, amazing when you think about it. But interpreters are trained to really make sure that they have the vocabulary needed to to adjust to those language variations, but of course you need to give us that time. So one way that we hear from educators as well in terms of, hey, I have a good interpreter, but then I no longer feel as an educator that I'm involved in the conversation, because it seems like the interpreter and the parent are, having this conversation, and I feel left out as an educator. So that is definitely something that we want interpreters to be aware of, that everybody in the session needs to be engaged and involved. And one way that you can do that as an educator is ask the family to paraphrase what the interpreter just explained in their language. And so that way, everybody is on the same page, and then you have the assurance that what's being interpreted is exactly what you said. So even if you don't speak the same language as the family, you're able to make sure that the interpreter is being as accurate as possible. And I'll share a couple of resources that you can that we have created so that families have a voice to let hey, this interpreter was great and I understood everything. He or she was patient, they were wonderful, but this interpreter I just could not understand, or they didn't actually speak my language. We want families to be able to share that type of feedback with you as well. And then a couple of last points, important to feel, again, as educators, that this is your meeting. We're there to collaborate with you as interpreters, but this is still your meeting. So it is important that you speak directly to the family, and making sure that you engage with them as if we were not in the meeting. Making sure that you understand that sometimes we have to come in and raise our hand and ask for clarification, but still, this is your session, and we take your lead. And everything that we hear, we are trained to interpret. And that's something that is important as an educator to understand, that if we hear a conversation that you may be having with another educator on the side while we interpret, we are trained to share that conversation as well, because we want to make sure that we have that equity and communication, right? That everybody in the meeting hears the same information as if they spoke the same language. That's our goal. And so if we hear something that that somebody is saying, a trained interpreter is really there to share that as well. And then I think this is one that sometimes we miss doing, because everything is so rushed in our schools and meetings happen one after the other, and we understand. But taking the time to talk to the interpreter after the meeting is just as important as meeting with them before. Let us know what we can do better. We may be able to share what you did better, what you did great as an educator. Thank you for letting me introduce myself, or these are some cultural linguistic dilemmas that I just saw as an interpreter that you may want to keep in mind for next time. And listen to some of the suggestions that we give you, but we're there to hear your suggestions as well. We may also, share, for example, if there's some forms that we see over and over in the same meetings that you provide to the families, we may suggest that form needs to be translated, so that that takes away from us having to explain it during the meeting. So we may just give you some tips on things that you can do, but also open to suggestions that you have as far as what to do better. And so your state is an amazing state, and absolutely so honored to work with the interpreters in Massachusetts. And this is a tier level of professional development that the Department of Education of Elementary and Secondary Education created, and actually gave to NATISL to develop a series of courses that we're currently teaching. But I just wanted to show you this just to remind you that not every interpreter may have the skills that you need for the meeting that you're having. And it's important to choose the right person, because somebody who may be bilingual may not automatically be able to interpret information for you, especially when it comes to special education meetings, which have, as you know, very complex information and a lot of legal terminology, a lot of medical terminology that sometimes the interpreters may not be aware of. And so, for us and for your state, we determined that a tier 1 interpreter is the person, for example, in the front office that may have very spontaneous communication with families. Let's say that somebody comes in and they say, I need to pick up my child from the clinic. It's important that they are able to communicate that information with some standards, but they may not be able to communicate information related to special education, for example. So you do need to have the right person for the right meeting. And so some of the courses that we teach for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in your state kind of follow this tier level. And you do have access to what we call the Language Ambassador course. This is in your state's website. It's a really foundational course, what we call the tier 1. It's important that you share this information with others in your schools so that they have at least the foundational skills to be able to communicate with families well. So how do we bridge those cultures, right? Sometimes I think that bridging languages, it's a little bit easier than bridging cultures. So I want to kind of introduce or remind you, for those of you who may be familiar with these terms, about how to create those bridges in terms of culture. So cultural competency relates to, me, for example, giving you a whole list of traits that Hispanic Latino families display in your meetings. So I remember when I worked in one of our school districts here in the state of Georgia, I got a lot of requests from counselors, from educators to do presentations about what Hispanic Latino families celebrated during the year, or how we dealt with grief and all of these things. And I thought, there's no way I can do that, right? Because our population is so diverse. We have so much variation in terms of the acculturation levels, different attitudes. Every person is a world. So cultural competency is more about, sorry, I think there's somebody with their mic on. There we go. Thank you. So cultural competency is more about memorizing a set of traits. And I think that generates more stereotypes, right? Because people may not always fit in this box, in this list of traits that were given to you. So I do challenge you to think beyond that, that list of things that people are supposed to or not supposed to do. And think more about the concept of cultural humility, which is something that I call it a verb, because it's something that you practice every single day, and you have opportunities with families to do this every single day. And with colleagues, right? It doesn't always have to be with families, but with colleagues, with peers. Really, it's about a lifelong commitment to evaluate how you respond to others who may be different than you, right? How do you respond to different imbalances? How do you respond to people who may not be agreeable to you for whatever reason? So it's a process of self-evaluation, and it's not really an evaluation of other people. It's more about an evaluation of yourself in terms of your perspectives. And that's a little bit, to me, it's a little bit easier to manage, because I know I can't change the world, but I know I can change myself and my perspectives. So that might be a good option for you to implement in terms of seeing how you react to specific people, and how you can do better. A few things that are easy for us to change, that it could be implementing very soon, is watching your nonverbal language. I think when we are learning a second language or adding another language to our to our list, we are very much aware of your body language. So if I see this person in the middle coming into my child's school, I may not be able to, or may not want to go back to the school, right? But really watching our body language is really, really important. And that's something that you can easily change, just kind of being aware of how you're projecting to the people that you talk to. Another tip is to really, and we really appreciate this, I think, across cultures, we appreciate when you understand that we are all very different. I always show this particular slide, and I often ask participants, which number do you think is a Hispanic and Latino person? Or which number represents a person who speaks Spanish, for example. And most of the time people say, okay, number 6, definitely number 6, and that's it, right? And I often just move on and say, well, actually, all of them, right? We all have a lot of variation in terms of our ethnicity, our racial compositions, our backgrounds. And so it is important not to make those generalizations and, stick to a list of traits that you feel are representative of our population. So just important to kind of keep that in mind and keep that in check when you are meeting with parents in your schools, to make sure that that you do have that in the front of your mind, right? That you're not generalizing people just by the way they look. And then another simple way to make sure that you're practicing this cultural humility concept is understanding that names are very, very important across cultures. Oftentimes we have cultures where names are provided to a child during an event. It's a big event. It's a celebration, a name celebration. So making sure that you are pronouncing the parent's name, that you're pronouncing the child's name correctly and respectfully, that in itself brings a lot of open communication. When people ask me, for example, how do you pronounce your last name? I love that, number one, because they feel curious about who I am, but also they're interested in making sure that they're respectful. So that opens, a line of communication, and I start telling them about my background and all of that, and that just creates a connection with a person. So that might be a good opportunity for you to start, creating those bridges with families, whether they are in the special education program or not. So I'll put this in the chat to make sure that you have an opportunity, if you haven't seen this particular TED Talk, that this one was one of the best ones I've seen. It's Gerardo, not Jerry. And he talks about how the name change or the mispronunciation of his name changed his whole perspective, and how he really wanted educators to make sure that could really affect children in the long run. So it's a pretty interesting resource for sure. But really take the time to get to know the journeys and experiences of the students, especially perspectives on disability. So sometimes some families, as I mentioned before, may have different perspectives that you're not familiar with. And really, navigating through all of those identities is important, making sure that you understand that we live in a spectrum. And we, as people who, came from another country, we have to kind of find a balance with so many cultural expectations, right? And making sure that you understand how we bring that to school. We may be using language in many different ways compared to something that you may be used to. So really understanding how we use language, what our language resources are, and what's missing from the support that we need for our families. So being intentional, I'm hoping that you take all of this information and create a plan, a personal plan, a professional plan, to be very intentional and to practice these cultural humility pieces. Understanding that has to start with a good self-evaluation about your own biases, your own stereotypes, and figuring out why that is. And seeing how you bring that, if you are an educator, how you bring that to the schools and the families that you talk to, but also as interpreters, right? We all have them, so making sure that we are in touch with that and figuring out how to address them. Also as families, right? Our families have their own expectations of our educators and the interpreters they work with. So really it has to be a self-awareness from every angle. But besides just being aware, actually taking the steps to figure out what you need to change, whether it's being more aware of your nonverbal communication, understanding the families that are in your classroom a little bit better and their perspectives on disabilities and their acceptance, or denial of what's going on is really, really important. And really using the strength-based, this asset-based vocabulary and mentality is really, really helpful. And part of that is, being as respectful as we can about the diversity that we have in our schools and our classrooms. So I'm going to leave you with a few resources. So this is one example. This is, again, something that is free for you to download. We have this in, I believe, 14 different languages on our website, but this is just a short survey that you can provide to parents in, again, 14 different languages, basically saying, how was your interpreter, right? What was the speed of conversation? Were you able to understand them? Did they speak your language, or do we need to make any changes in the future? So we want to make sure that families have the opportunity to feel empowered to share their information as well. Their input is very, very important in terms of language access. We have other resources that, again, are free for you to download. This is also, I believe, in 14 different languages, and this was created with RevEd, which is an organization in Missouri. And they were really focusing on child interpreters and how difficult it is for a child to interpret information that is very technical and very complex, not only because of the vocabulary, but the stress that it puts on the child. And so we want to make sure that families understand that we support the fact that that they want their children to be multilingual, and that's wonderful, but there's a space for that, right? And that we have to make sure that children are not collaborating as interpreters when they're not ready or trained to do so. So those are fact sheets mostly for parents to understand the implications. Our code of ethics is important for you if you are an educator, of course, as an interpreter, to get to know some of the responsibilities of the interpreters and what to do in some of these situations, and understanding that dilemmas will always come up, and we have to be aware of how to address some of those things when they come up. Lots of resources for educators on working with interpreters, some of the language legislation that exists, and some of the resources that you can access as well. And then we usually publish some articles about disabilities, about language access, early childhood, and interpreters. So you can find those on our website as well. Lots of resources for interpreters. Again, the pre-session is kind of the introduction that I was telling you about, that as professional interpreters, we are hopeful that you give us a little bit of time to just kind of tell you what's going to happen during the session so that it can go as smoothly as possible. But those have been translated to many different languages. And we have best practices and tips, not only for interpreters, but also for educators to be able to know how to collaborate with an interpreter. We have our own online school where we provide information about foundational training, but also professional development and continuing education for interpreters, specifically for your state. And this is just brief information about our certification test. We're hoping that it'll be available sometime in the fall of this year. We're conducting the pilot, making sure that we have a good tool and a very valid tool for educators to assess the language skills, but also the performance of interpreters. So right now we're in the middle of, it'll have a written and an oral component. So we're testing the oral component at the moment. And so we're hoping that by the fall, we will have a little bit more information about when this is going to be available. So that was a lot of information, some additional resources and references, and this is my contact information. If you ever have a question, if you have a doubt, a concern, suggestion, feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to support you any way that I can. So I'm going to stop sharing my presentation and seeing if you have any questions for me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all those, steps, detail information, resources. And I'm going to add on the chat, if you feel free to add to the chat your question or unmute yourself to engage. I was looking for the link for the website, so I also added the Natizo website on the chat.
Thank you. Let me see if I have, I don't have it open. I thought I had the video open,
For the
Jerry.
chat. Mhm.
Yeah, but I'll definitely find it.
Well, participants will receive a follow-up email with the recording of
Mhm.
today's presentation, and we also gonna have available on our YouTube channel in the next few days. I'm not 100% sure how many days it takes, Pat Cameron, but you know, the next 2 days. I would say thank you for joining us.
There is one question in the chat
Oh,
about
there
how
is?
long until there's a national certification.
Oh, I missed that. Thank you so much.
Very good question, Susie. It's part of my doctoral degree, so I'm hoping that's very soon. But we are, again, we're in the process of, we have already identified a platform that we're going to be using for the oral test. So that was the biggest step. We're hoping that in the fall, sometime, late August, September, I'm going to say we should have a tool ready. So the idea of the test is we have mirror a lot of the certification process that other fields have gone through. So the medical and the legal, we kind of borrowed a lot of information from them, and also the sign language interpreter. So we didn't have to start from scratch, which was great. But we will have a written component which will assess, knowledge of ethics and knowledge of how to manage a meeting, and how to be be respectful with the families, but also with the educators. And then the oral component, of course, will check consecutive interpretation, simultaneous, what we call sight translation, which is what we were talking about reading a document out loud in another language. So we want to make sure that all the interpreters that we test have those skills to be able to support you. So it is a mystery or a misery, Susie. I don't know which one. I think it's both, but it is both. But it is definitely worth it. I've learned a lot, about language interpretation, about family engagements. I'm thankful for the time, but yeah, I'm waiting for it to be over. So.
Well, I really appreciated all the tips that you gave about just orienting the interpreter, to the content and, educational language and terminology ahead of time. And, and so I think just solves so many barriers that families often encounter because, as you said, there are some words like autism, ADHD that aren't translatable in other languages. And so it really helps put everybody on the same page and in a level playing field. So
I'm wondering,
Mhm.
I'm wondering if
Yeah,
people can
absolutely.
actually add something to the chat that they learned today that they didn't know
Mhm.
before.
That would be great. Absolutely. And while they're doing that, I think, Pat, that's an excellent point, because with interpreting, especially in special education settings, interpreters are taught to not just be aware of the language, but also the cultural piece of having to explain special education to families who may not be aware of what that looks like here in the United States. So most of the time, our experience has been that, for example, I'm from Colombia. Special education looks very different in Colombia, right? There's, special institutions where you send your child and you don't see them until the next week. That's what, when we say special education to a parent, that's the idea. That's the image that a lot of them have. And so the interpreters are taught to be very aware of that body language and make sure that they help educators understand that, it looks very different in our countries. And so it could be scary. And it could put the parent, very nervous. It can make the parent very nervous when you say things like, a self-contained classroom or, specific services. We just have to be very tactful as interpreters in terms of how we explain that.
So Raquel, I don't know if you'd like to unmute and ask your question directly, but it's a wonderful comment in the chat. There's students from Smith College,
Oh, I
and
love that.
training trainers,
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. Hi Anna.
Hi.
Thank you so much for today's talk. We are actually students from Smith College doing a data journalism project on Hispanic students in special education because we
Wow.
found in our school district there's a overrepresentation of Hispanic students in special education, which means like overall they are like 18% of the overall student population, while in special education program they're like 30%. And we are like talking to special education coordinators in the district to figure out like what could be the reasons. And we reach out to FCSN about like to get some insight, and they directed us to your talk today,
Okay.
which I'm very thankful. And so we wonder if you're open to like connect afterwards, because I think we want to get more insights from you. Like we have other questions as well.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I think, Rachel, you have exactly explained the reason why I got into this doctorate. Exactly that was the reason, because I started seeing a lot of our multilingual students being overrepresented in special education and sometimes underrepresented in gifted education, for example. And I started getting curious about why that is. And a lot of times it's because of the interpreters that are either not collaborating or not found when they need to be collaborating. So, and sometimes the educators just not knowing how to reach the family and how to communicate. So absolutely happy to talk to you. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
Anna, could you just pop your email or contact information in the chat? That would be probably the most accessible.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch shortly. Thank you.
Sure. Absolutely happy to talk to you.
Other questions, or, as Asariani suggested, what's your biggest takeaway from tonight? What are those nuggets that you'll hold? Cindy, go ahead. I see yourself taking yourself off mute.
Thank you, and I'm really happy to be here. Also, I want to say to the student at Smith College, I live and work in Northampton, and or work from Northampton and live in Northampton. So I'd be happy to talk with you about the LPAC program here. But at FCSN, I frequently use the interpreter service to speak with families. And so I find it really helpful to give an overview of the case before the interpreter. This is like not for an IEP meeting, but when a parent calls into the call center, I'll try and give the interpreter an overview and try and explain some of the terms before we call the parent, so that the interpreter has a sense of the family's needs. And I always hear, the interpreter indicate that they will keep it confidential, and that's a big part of it. So it took me a while to feel comfortable sharing that information with the interpreter, but now I realize how important it is for them to understand before we call.
We need more people like you, Cindy, for sure, because it does help us be as prepared. And yes, if the interpreter has been trained, and you'll be able to tell if somebody comes into a call or to a meeting and then jump into the interpretation, that may be somebody that has not been trained, who is bilingual but has not gone through professional training. So because we do ask interpreters to really tell you how it's going to go, how we protect that information as if it was our own, how we're going to be asking questions, so all of that. So I'm glad that you were able to find the help that you needed. Yes, and look, see, sorry, Asariani, you and I think the same way, except that I did not remember the date, and I called our organization Matisel instead of Natisel because I was typing so fast. But Natisel is having regional chapters. So we have developed regional chapters across the United States, basically because we want to bring very specific professional development to states, things that are very relevant to your state. So we are going to have a regional conference in Massachusetts, and it is, thank you, Asiriane, in October 18th. I just could not remember the date. And you want to tell a little bit about our partnership in that sense, Asiriane?
Well, yeah, I can say some, and you can jump in.
Sure.
I know we're getting close to 6 o'clock, but you know, the partnership is to bring those trainings, not only for the interpreters, but also for the professionals working with the interpretation services and the parents, right? We want to make sure that the parent actually feel that they can engage, that can ask questions and how to redirect. So I see that some other people actually turn the camera on, so welcome. And it's gonna happen on the conference that, like, you know, Anna just shared, the regional conference is gonna happen on October 18 at the Schreft Center, where the Federation is located. And we're gonna have more information in the next, you know, months to come. And I would say stay tuned. If you're not part of the newsletter, receiving the newsletter for the Federation, I would invite you to actually sign up to receive, and you're gonna be updated with all that is coming next.
Yes, we would love to have lots of you as represented as speakers, as participants. You know, we want to make sure that we meet each other and connect and share resources. So
Right.
Any final questions or comments? Well, I would love to thank both Asariani and Anna, and, you know, in bringing all this information to us. And we look forward to everything that the future will bring with the conference, and, you know, everybody's taking all of these tips back to their districts, back to their schools, back to their families, their coworkers. Please share this information widely so that we just continue to improve access for students and families in all meetings, all events at schools, you know, all the opportunities we have to engage with families. So thank you both very, very much.
absolutely.
And we'll have the
Thank you.
recording available within the next couple of days, and it will be posted. The slides will be sent out and along with an evaluation. So we treasure your thoughts and your feedback, and we hope that everybody has a terrific evening. So thank you all.
Very much. Thank you so much for
Thank
your
Anna.
time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.